Good evening. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation to part of your 25th birthday celebrations. I actually share a birthday in as much as I set up Savills residential research 25 years ago. So it was a good vintage, 1989. The reason I'm here, or at least I've been invited, I think, is because we got involved with space syntax. We've been involved with all sorts of projects, certainly as a company with space syntax over the years. But I was particularly involved with something called UrbanBuzz. And I think I'm probably expected to talk about that, but I'm not going to say a word about it, except that you can find the research that we did, which very, very strongly linked value, including both retail and residential values, with the global connectivity of streets, which is perhaps counterintuitive to a lot of the sort of development and house building profession. What, though, I'm going to do is actually take the title of Urban Buzz and talk about what is important about the buzz of cities, the buzz of urban centres. And I'm going to do this from the context now of leading Savills' world research team, which is small but perfectly formed organisation within the company, trying to gather together all the research we have at the local level with big global themes. And there is a big global theme that relates to urbanism, which I think is incredibly important. And it's those sorts of themes that I want to talk about, always, of course, with a view on markets and values, which is what we do. We're all very familiar with the fact that this is a type of real estate, certainly in the West, that's now outmoded. It is industrial. It is based on the if one takes a Marxist analysis, the means of production and capital. It was real estate that responded to raw materials and simply had to put people in not very high quality conditions next to those raw materials and the production. We're all pretty familiar with that. What I want to suggest, though, is that the late 20th century, or the 20th century and the late 20th century in particular, as we all know, went through an economic revolution as we went from producing things to the service economy. But what I'm actually going to suggest, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with this notion, is that this is now an outmoded model of real estate. This was about a late 20th century service economy that is now as defunct, certainly in Britain, most of Europe, and a lot of the developed world, as that last slide, as the dark satanic mills. I'm not quite sure what I least prefer to work in, actually, that or the dark satanic mill. But anyway, I think this is Green Park at Reading, but I'm not absolutely sure. It could be anywhere, couldn't it? It seems to us that what we're experiencing is a very, very definite devaluation of this type of real estate. And to the extent that the final phase of Green Park at Reading, for example, just cannot be developed in the same model as the first two phases. Why is this? Well, it's down to a change in the nature of the economy, which the likes of Richard Florida are very well tuned into, and I think an awful lot of economists are not so well tuned into. But we've moved from this service economy where the emphasis is very much here on cheap space, I mean, out-of-town retail, out-of-town business parks were really predicated on keeping your costs low, keeping the labour costs low. You could employ cheaper labour outside of the city than in the city. All those considerations. Whereas now, the value of people and the means of production is the talent of the people, the IP of people. Suddenly, capital has an altogether different connotation. Capital is about your people, not about money or even access to money. Consequently, we're talking at the moment and seeing, for example, out of Silicon Valley, that huge powerhouse of the modern economy in the USA, an exodus of talent. The exodus is out of the valley, out of the suburbs, and into San Francisco. And why is that? Well, actually, it's because it's a creative industry. And the creative industries need to be with other creative people. And a lot of these images are the Burning Man Festival, which I think is as much a part of the new sort of Californian culture as anything, and really illustrates that well. Europe, it seems to be particularly well placed to take advantage of this second tech expansion, if you like, that we're seeing at the moment. So there's a lot of creativity in that industry coming out of Silicon Valley into San Francisco. New York has also seen a huge growth in that area. This is Amsterdam. Berlin is another European city. Stockholm, another. Interestingly, I think English-speaking, but known for their creativity, their cosmopolitan culture, their and other sort of creative cultures, art and so forth, and of course our good old Silicon Roundabout in London. The point about all this is that there is something, a city X factor, je ne sais quoi, an urban noir even, that is attracting these industries and the people in these industries out of the boring old LA suburbs and into real cities, real spaces. And that has a big knock-on effect on values and the whole world of real estate. This is the Google campus, immortalised in a memorable film called The Interns or something like that, which I would actually say is the last throes of the business park. This is Google trying desperately to make the business park work. And boy, you know, do they put in a load of gadgets and gimmicks and so forth. They have to try to create on their own out-of-town site on a freeway in the middle of nowhere some kind of urban buzz. I don't think they can begin to compete with this, which is Frisco. It's not just sort of how does their cafe compete with this one, but how does it compete with the one down the road and the one across the road and the one the block. You know, there are just so many opportunities here for that meeting and that interaction that we heard about earlier that I think, frankly, Google are onto a losing battle there. I think it's really interesting that they've opened up, of course, very proud to say, Savills let them the space in King's Cross. Now, what have you got at King's Cross? Well, you've got a new urban quarter, you've got the Central St Martin's School of Art, you know, you've got something really interesting and buzzy, and you've got London there. It'd be interesting to see how many of Google's employees want to transfer to London after that. This all has an impact, and what I want to show you is some work that actually we haven't published yet. So these are graphics from a publication that's not yet in the public domain, but it's our Live Work Accommodation Index, as we call it. And what this index is based around, it's just a set of figures really, but what it's based around is a group of people, 7 people in their households, who are dropped into different world cities all over the globe. And this is how much it costs to accommodate one of them, but in terms of both offices and living space. And why is it that our clients, the occupiers, are willing to pay such a huge price in Hong Kong, London, New York, even Paris, Singapore? You know, these buzzy, really prominent cities. It is because that has much more value to them than that pure headline cost there. We're trying to get away from just the pounds per square foot, and there's all sorts of imaginative ways that people accommodate their employees. But I think it's interesting, actually, that the developing cities, the emerging cities, are so much cheaper. People are piling into those buzzy places because there is a bottom line implication. They can attract their most valuable, most productive, most generative workers to those cities. And I also want to show how this is a particular feature of post-Lehman's. I think 2008 is, as it were, the tipping point where this new economy, this move away from the dark satanic mills and the even darker satanic business parks, is actually really taking off. So here I've compared New York City, this is residential property, but you could be comparing all sorts, with the rest of New Jersey. And you can see First of all, it did not decline as much. It did not suffer the extreme price falls that New Jersey did. And it's recovered. Now, you actually find prime property in Manhattan is pretty much back to its peak value now. San Francisco, same story. Extraordinary peak and trough in California, and indeed in Frisco, but just not to the same extent. And Frisco values now pretty much at their past peak level. Ditto London, well, we all know what's happened to London. London's way above peak now. You can see this repeated again and again in most of those world cities where there is a real value. This is not talking about something that's nice to have or would be good or is something that planners want or politicians want. This is something that actually drives business. Business values it and wants it. And it has a distinct implication, which is why we've got very interested in what we call in our next report the World City X Factor. These are just examples of urbanism. I think it's really striking how in the top world cities, we're looking at all sorts of different character, but we're looking at basically urban grids, those networks that Tim and his colleagues have, over the years, have proved work time and time again. And we shouldn't be so caught up in this high-rise or mid-rise or even low-rise issue. It's really quite noticeable that it's only really New York and Hong Kong that are really high-density, high-rise. You can get pretty high densities without going high-rise. It's much more about the intensity of the urban fabric and the urban buzz that matters. The notable exception, and we did take an extreme example here with the palm in Dubai, I think the palm is extreme, but actually I think Dubai's in danger of making the mistakes of building a late 20th century city into 21st century world. And probably there's quite a lot of work to be done there in retrofitting. I think the pure drive economic conditions of Dubai are so strong that it will succeed, but I suspect there's going to be some urban repair that needs to be done there. Just to sort of drill down a little bit more on why diversity and the size of cities, the variety in cities matters. I think it's particularly noticeable that London is much more of a tech hub, a creative hub, than Paris is. And what I'm trying to show in this graph is quite simply the costs of office space in London for a financial company. It's high and it's grown. We all know that. London's a major world financial centre. But look how much cheaper the creative space is. In London, there's a wide choice of accommodation. You can go to Shoreditch or even goodness knows into the East End and beyond and get much cheaper space in London. It really suits creatives who want just to get on with being creative. They don't have to pay these really high rents, which is why I get so annoyed when our competitors keep putting out that London's the most expensive city because it has the highest prime rate per square foot. Well, it does if you're a hedge fund, but London's a great place. The lack of diversity in Paris is actually really telling here. The way it's sort of hemmed in by that donut of sort of social housing and so forth actually means that rents for a finance company are pretty much the same as for a creative hub. So I think it's going to suffer as a result of that, and you can already see it's not the same sort of magnet to creative industry as London is, or indeed Amsterdam or Berlin or wherever. So that's just a little vignette of how values and the urban fabric and the urban condition interact, and why I think they're so important in the 21st century global economy.